So in looking at the very, very ancient rock art in the Sahara, there are quite ancient dates for that. And in a lot of parts of Africa, you have to have a healthy suspicion of the dates they propose because they are continually having to push them back because they are continually underestimating the antiquity of a lot of these African civilizations and artifacts. So beginning in the Sahara, and this is actually in Sudan, they call it the Khartoum Neolithic, but the patterns, the wavy lines, sometimes they would actually use fish skeletons to make markings on the clay. This is a very old Neolithic style of pottery, like 8,000 BCE. And pottery in the Sahara itself is even older than that. But the archaeologists all agree that the styles in the Nile Valley originate first in the Sahara. So this is a really important part of Central North Africa for the whole history of the world, really, Africa itself as well. And one of the older styles that you'll see in the petroglyphs, which is the engravings, are these very deeply grooved styles that usually are older than a lot of the paintings. And sometimes they refer to the Boobaloo style, which is based after a name for the African buffalo. That may figure also in this female figure where you've got horns. She doesn't have a face, and you can see little peck marks here as if people were extracting rock dust. We're going to see that theme a lot right here, like the sacred vulva as a place rich in life power. And so people are always rubbing out rock dust from this or for indentations in the rock in order to do ceremony with it. And with figures like this, we always have to think about, well, you know, we can't really say for sure, is this a goddess? Is this a priestess, a shaman? Is this a female ancestor? All of those are possible nominees. But you see the femaleness indicated very sharply here, and this is something that's really passed over when we're looking at rock art, at least when they are looking at rock art. So that's why I made it my business to dig out what the actual cultural testimony is around women in this very ancient period. So this one, they call her the Lady of Alundra in southeastern Algeria in the Tassili-n-Ajjer region, is very old. And I'm estimating her at somewhere between 8,000 and 6,000 years old. So many millennia. And as you can see, she's very weathered. I have another view that's a little bit sharper. You can see how the color varies in different photographs. But you can see these patterns that are either scarified on her body, tattooed on her body, or painted. And another thing is that they could even represent the flow of life force because you see the same patterns also appearing in this numinous area around her head. She's horned, or she has the crescent, but these types of horn are seen on African cattle. And so that's a theme that goes through a lot of this rock art. She's wearing ritual ties with strands, with fringes. She's got a kilt also fringed and leg ties. We'll see in a moment more closely, but this is a good close-up of the actual photograph where she's got these things she's wearing on her hands, which kind of look like the hand puppets, the dance puppets that the Inuit use and the Yupik people in Alaska and Canada use in ceremonial dance. So representing spirits, perhaps. They look like they're knit or twined fibers of some kind. You can clearly see they're working with fibers here. These dotted patterns on the breasts are significant because we see them in other cultures in different parts of Africa. So here in the Nok culture, which we're going to come back to, we see dotted patterns on the breast and belly. And so they're indicating this is a area of the body that's rich in vital power. Life force is pouring out of the breasts. And so you have the breast marked in that way, the belly marked in that way. You also have patterns on the legs, and you can see also the ritual strands tied around her knees. So this looks to me, whether or not it's a goddess or a shaman or an ancestor, this looks to me very much like a reflection of some of the ritual, the ceremonial practice of women in that long ago period of ancient Algeria. Underneath her, this is the clearest because this is a painting of it, and it has continued weathering down, of a goddess with a rainbow over her, or a woman, it could be. And you also have these older male dancers that were apparently, well, they're either painted under or over. They might have been painted over because I see the red there around the white. And that overpainting is common. It happens in a lot of places in the world. This is more what they actually look like on the rock face. And a very beautiful painting appears to be all women clapping, dancing, laughing together. Over on the side here, you have sort of a majestic seated female figure who's holding some object in one of her hands, as if she's presiding over this. And this really goes along with the clapping chants that are done in a lot of parts of Africa by groups of women in ceremony. So now this here is in northern Algeria, petroglyph, so it's pecked into the stone rather than painted. And it's part of a much larger wall we'll see in a moment, natural wall. But the key figure here is this invoking woman. And she has the ritual ties that we saw in Tassili. She's surrounded by very large animals, which according to some scholars, the big animals are an indication of very great antiquity. And then later the humans get larger and the animals get smaller. But anyhow, there is a line of vitality that proceeds from her womb to the hunter. And, you know, here he is with the bow going after the ostrich and whatever that is there. But anyway, the idea of the priestess, this is something that recurs in the both the rock paintings and the petroglyphs in the Sahara. And so you constantly see this gesture, which if a human would be invocation, if a divinity, it would be a gesture of benediction, that she is actually conferring blessing on those who pass by. And so this is at a spot in the country of Niger, in a mountaintop at Ajjer. And you can see that this paint is recent. It almost looks like chalk and charcoal. The Tuareg people passing by there make prayers to her for wealth, and they make offerings to her, and they ask for her blessing on their way along the camel trails going through this desert region. And the whole top there, you can see from another view here, you can see all 5 figures, that this is near the top of a mountain. And so anywhere that there's an open rock face like this, even if it takes a lot of serious climbing, you have these kinds of figures appearing. And what's interesting here is you have the dark upper body and the white skirt. This one has apparently a solar disc on her head. And, you know, this one almost looks like a child. You've got animals in the scene also. You've got very female proportions here on the body. And so this disc on the head, of course, we're really familiar with from ancient Egypt, but these are older. You know, a lot of the Saharan art is much older than the stuff at least the classical Egyptian civilization that we see in the Nile Valley. And so this figure, very, very female-looking figure, has maybe a bow in one hand, maybe an arrow, or this could be a ceremonial staff. You can see more of the animals and a little bit of the Tifinagh script, which is what the Tuareg or the Amazigh, that there's their writing style that's passed from mother to daughter. I had an example of it. It's really more clear here. You can see Tifinagh lettering behind this figure on both sides. So female script in the Sahara. Now this is really one of the most important story stones that I've found, especially from the standpoint of women, because you have a ceremonial scene going on. And we're going to get close-ups of some of this in a minute, but you can see a number of people. This one's got their arms raised, charging power towards this central scene here. A woman bending over, we're going to see a close-up of her, but a man kneeling with his bow, presenting his bow in front of her, as if to bless. So again, hunting magic is probably being signaled here. And then this elder figure in the background. So let's go close up. Now, it could be that she's blowing on an arrow or on a staff. That could be her hand, but it's probably the top of the staff, as we'll see in a minute. We have her head completely painted over in red ochre. And so this is a theme that's kind of a Pan-African theme, especially around humans who are in a spiritually centered state, with this infusion of spirit and power coming into them. And we'll see this later on from South Africa. Behind her is an elder woman, and it looks like she had white hair, but the whole face and hair, again, covered with red ochre. And she's holding a kind of a club-like staff. When I was making the Woman Shaman DVD, I didn't really plan to have a chapter on staff women, but the material itself dictated it. I was just gathering together clumps of motifs and themes, and very quickly discovered that was one. That was one that could not be left out because it turns up all over the world. And so here we see it in the Sahara, and it also shows up in Southern Africa, which we're going to see. This is another one from the Tassili-n-Ajjer. So this is a whole area of rock formations in southeastern Algeria that once had rivers running through it. There was water in the Sahara. People were fishing in the Sahara. And so these figures are pretty classic Saharan style, except the faces. First I looked at the faces like, well, the faces aren't as artistic as the rest of these paintings. But then after I kind of meditated on them some more, I realized these are not supposed to be human heads. These are animal heads. The profile is like that of an animal. You have animal ears or horns coming out of the top. And this again is a theme that we see in Southern Africa, in Namibia and South Africa especially, is ancestral beings who have animal attributes. And shamans can also take on these attributes. So currently in South Africa, there's a whole argument, really bitter fight between archaeologists as to whether these are shamans or whether they're ancestors or something else. Now we go into Chad for a moment. And this is a really tall piece of rock art. These figures are over 6 feet tall. And they appear to all be female, naked, their bodies outlined and filled with these shimmering patterns, this flow of energy. This one you can see she has a little loincloth with a belt. So not really naked, actually. This one has it as well. And there's an adult woman standing with the full women's skirt that we see a lot in this art. So this appears to me to be a womanhood initiation ceremony. They each have a staff over one shoulder that may be used in the dances. They don't have faces, they have spirals. So these are not necessarily individual women, but it's more, this is a ceremony that we do, and maybe even the place where they do it. The rock dust grinding is happening here, and this is found over a lot of Africa. You see more examples, which there may be several uses going on here. One, the ceremonial powder being taken from the living rock to be used for whatever, rain magic, conception, but also it may have been a way for people who are sharpening tools using the rock. But this rock is sacred. There's an interaction going on with the rock by the local people. And so the Tubu people who live in this area of northern Chad call these Niola Doa, the beautiful ladies. And this is later. We're moving up now into somewhere 2,000 years BCE or later. And so the styles shift, and you begin to see, we're going to see some more of these strange looking heads. But you've got the same thing we've been seeing so far. I meant to mention this earlier. The representation of the human form really very parallel to what the Egyptians were doing. Heads in profile, shoulders and arms forward, body in profile. And you see this in the Sahara, and you see it a lot of other places in Africa. It's kind of a Pan-African way of stylizing the human form in this art a lot. Here's a good example of what they look like, the original ochre pigments. And this one, again from Chad, you've got this very droopy, wide coiffures. Or, as some people have suggested, these are representing magic mushrooms. The dotted pattern in them, which could also be what we've seen before, the numinousness. But there's some other clearer. I don't have the male figures in here, but there are also some mushroom-headed males in this part of Chad. And you have these very abstract and highly symbolic figures of invoking beings. This one, no breast, no penis, but you've got those wide female hips, the hands raised. Also, you see it on the other figures back here. And almost like a series of chakras down the front of the body, as if they're mapping energy centers. A lot of these figures have a mysterious circle hanging from the elbow, like a purse, like a basket, could be a small drum, various possibilities, and I haven't seen anybody explain that. It also shows up here, and here, and here. And so these round heads are classic in many parts of the Sahara. We've got a little bit of script going on there too. And so this is art that most of you will never have seen. It's just phenomenal, a whole cultural record of society in Chad, Niger, parts of Mali, parts of Libya and Algeria, and yet we're not shown it. And some of it is just really dramatically beautiful. So here you have a male and female pair. This is the woman with the long skirt. This is a kind of skirt that you see quite a lot, by the way, in still today in Aboriginal parts of Ethiopia and Namibia. Leather skirts, because these are hurting people. So this female figure, again, that same sort of similar to the Egyptians, but this style originates earlier in the Sahara than it does in Egypt. So that's some of the really powerful cultural influence of the Saharan worlds on, what we normally think about as the most ancient cultural record in Africa. And you see similarities to Egypt here with the multiple strands of necklaces, but then this is really more tracking with West Africa, the waist beads, and the leather skirt. The half moon shaped head we're going to see a little bit later on in Ethiopia. So there are all kinds of cultural exchanges that are going on here, from one place to another over really vast distances.